right, so the person I want to talk to you about tonight is a man who played a key part in Luther's life, a man by the name of Johann von Staupitz. And as I said, the background is important only to give you a frame of reference, but then there's a bigger story to this. So indulge me. Johann Staupitz was Vicar General of the Observant Augustinians, provincial of the Saxon province of the Hermits of St. Augustine, abbot of St. Peter's Benedictine cloister in Salzburg, and ecclesiastical superior and spiritual advisor to the young Martin Luther. And all of these men had their educations at these important pivotal universities. So Staupitz was educated at Leipzig, Cologne, Tübingen, served as prior of the Augustinian houses in Tübingen and Munich, and was appointed dean of the theological faculty at the newly founded University of Wittenberg by his childhood friend, the Elector Frederick III of Saxony, Frederick the Wise. So it's interesting to note that this is childhood friends. There's always these connections. There's these intricate connections through all of Luther's circle. In 1503, he was elected Vicar General of the Reformed Congregation of the Hermits of St. Augustine, an association of observant Augustinians scattered throughout 4 provinces of the order: Saxony, Rhenish Swabia, Cologne, and Bavaria. In 1509, he was elected provincial of Saxony as well. Because of the Augustinian generals, there was fragmentation. This fragmentation is what eventually Luther, this is not in the article, but Luther will be sent to Rome. Luther goes to Rome in 1510, 1511 over this issue of fragmentation. So when I told you, be careful when you read history books, even some of the better history books, even some of the people that I've said that's a good book, they will be ambiguous about that period. But if you understand the background of what Staupitz was in charge of, this is actually what Luther was commissioned to go to Rome for, to make peace between these several fragmented orders. Staupitz was charged with the task of integrating the Reformed congregation into the Saxon province. In the end, his attempt to merge them failed because of the implacable opposition of the large observant houses such as Nuremberg and Erfurt, who appealed to the Pope against the leadership of their own order. This is a classic part, what I'm going to read to you. Although Staupitz was unsuccessful at reuniting the Augustinian observants and conventuals, he nevertheless prospered as an ecclesiastical administrator and gained a reputation as a preacher and spiritual counselor. In Tübingen, he preached a series of sermons on Job. That would be in 1497-98, that were preserved in manuscripts and printed in 2 critical editions in the 20th century. He himself was not fond of these early sermons and remarked wryly that he feared he'd afflicted Job with a worse plague than boils. I like that when somebody can say, my preaching was really bad. He preached an additional series of sermons in Salzburg, Nuremberg, and Munich. Many of his later sermons were reworked and published as pamphlets, including the important treatise on predestination. So you know that his whole center of his studies and all of it revolved around predestination, but not fully as others later, but that was the pivotal point in his work. In no city was Staupitz more popular than Nuremberg, where a circle of friends formed a solidarity around him. This so-called Solidaritas Staupitzianas numbered in its membership many of the more prominent citizens of Nuremberg, including Lazarus Spengler, the city secretary, Albrecht Dürer, the artist, Christopher Schrull, and a former colleague of the University of Wittenberg. Now it's important when you start to get to know all of these people, because no matter where you go in Reformation studies, these will be reoccurring names. and one more, which I keep mentioning, which is Johann Reuchlin. These will keep reoccurring over and over again because they all play a part. It's like building blocks to build up to something. So, and if you really want to have some fun, when I'm ready to talk about this, in our day and age, we talk about things going viral. In Luther's day, things had their own way of going viral. So, you know, if somebody had something to say, it went first either to the preacher or to the person who was in the town center, like this man, Christopher Schrull. He was in the center of Nuremberg. He's like the nerve center of this bustling place. So he talks to the person who's in charge of this. And so, for example, Luther's thesis, that's how it's spread like that. Just passed on in this web of people who would then carry it like ants going back to wherever they're going, and it would get carried as far and as quickly. So we'll talk about that one. It's kind of a fascinating study to see how people distributed information in that day, and we think we're cutting edge. You know, we're so far advanced. Well, we are, because it did take 3 or 4 months to get a message to somebody in a town, maybe not more than 50 kilometers away, but it still got there. So, Schrull translated Staupitz's treatise on predestination into German, and an unnamed member of the Solidarity preserved his table talk, a collection of edifying extracts from his conversations, which I guarantee were nothing like Luther's. That'll hit you later. Staupitz had his own table talks, but they were probably very reserved and very proper. At the heart of Staupitz's theology was his doctrine of election. Whereas some medieval theologians thought that election was nothing more than the response of God to foreseen human behavior, Staupitz thought it was another name for the gracious initiative of God towards sinners, grounded in the mystery of uncreated love, unmotivated by human thought or action, and incapable of reduction to simple rational intelligibility. He was confident that human salvation begins with and rests at every point on such election. The rest of this article starts to talk more and more about his theology, but let's jump to his early years in the order with Luther. Luther had sought out Staupitz as a confessor and spiritual advisor. Staupitz attempted to help, but found it difficult to understand the complexity and the depth of the spiritual torment through which Luther was passing. While Luther was clearly suffering from a crisis prompted by an overly scrupulous conscience, he also, it's very interesting, he was also depressed by a deeper and darker tangle of anxieties that baffled Staupitz. Now, if you read the 3-volume work by Brecht, which I think is brilliant, Brecht will go into detail to talk about some of the things that plagued Luther, which I have not found any other author that has treated that subject as well. One of the things that I like about what Brecht did is he was very careful to kind of say, essentially, that whatever was perplexing Luther's spirit might have been there well before he even entered into the Augustinian order. And I kind of think that when you read Brecht, he makes sense of that. He puts it all together. It's one of the few books that I've read and I've thought was very thorough in his treatment of a lot of Luther's issues and the life of Luther, just as a sidebar. It's rare for me to say something is good like that. I always find the problems. Nevertheless, in spite of his limited understanding of Luther's problems, Staupitz was able to help him see the positive purpose of God in the temptations that assailed him, and to understand and embrace a more Augustinian view of grace and predestination. Luther later confessed that he would be an ungrateful, I have to say this right, an ungrateful papistical ass if he did not acknowledge the enormity of the debt which he owed to Staupitz. I don't know what a papistical ass is. Part of that debt was practical and mundane because Staupitz was busy in his administrative activities as vicar general and provincial, and had little time to spend as professor at Wittenberg. He therefore encouraged Luther to earn a doctor's degree in theology and to assume the chair that Staupitz felt he could no longer fill. As Luther later recounted the story, he opposed the suggestion that he became a theologian with a long list of excuses, only to have them all wittingly countered by Staupitz, who was not going to be thwarted in this matter. He wanted him to take that chair. In 1512, Luther was inaugurated as professor of Bible at Wittenberg, a position that he kept until his death in 1546. When the indulgence controversy broke out in Germany in 1517, Staupitz at first stood by Luther, and this will become the moral of the story here. Here's a man who gave counsel and advice to Luther, saw his struggles. Initially, he stood by him, urged him to consider the possibility of recantation, which I find probably for Staupitz was kind of like the fatherly thing, like you should recant, you should reconsider, which, considering that he spent this time with Luther, seems like an oddity, but he was the one that said you might even possibly consider recanting. Even when Luther was summoned before Cardinal Cajetan, Staupitz joined him in Augsburg and attempted to mediate the dispute. As soon as it became clear to Staupitz that the dispute could not be mediated and that Luther was in danger of arrest, he released Luther from his vow so that he could act with greater freedom. In 1520, Staupitz resigned as Vicar General of the Augustinian observance in order to accept an invitation from Cardinal Lang to become a preacher and advisor at his court in Salzburg. In 1521, he received permission from Rome to leave the Augustinian order and to join the Benedictine monastery in Salzburg, where he was promptly consecrated as abbot. Although in his last letter to Luther in 1524, Staupitz compared his love for Luther to the love David bore for Jonathan, he also made clear he was not completely in sympathy with the direction of the Reformation, that which it had taken. It seemed to him the adherents of the new movement had made issues of conscience out of matters that were theologically neutral and had abused the freedom of the gospel by their conduct. Shortly after composing his reply to Luther, Staupitz died, December 28, 1524. His body was buried in the Benedictine monastery in Salzburg. While Staupitz had not broken communion with the Catholic Church and had even attempted to put some distance between himself and Luther, his works were nevertheless placed on the index of prohibited books by Pope Paul IV in 1559. Now, I read there's a moral to this, which is, if you start off somewhere like Luther and Staupitz in a relationship, it's very perplexing, but it's a great application for today, because there's many people that they start off and they're there in close proximity, and then suddenly there's some personal issue on the horizon they take issue with. In Staupitz's case, he thought people were taking this Reformation and pushing it to the extremes, and one of the other writers who writes says something to the effect of that they were abusing the liberty of the gospel. Frankly, Luther was defending the liberty of the gospel, and anybody in that position should have stayed by Luther's side. So it's almost like a stain on the man's life. Bad enough, he said, I have to remove myself. But it's almost like, I want to say it's poetic justice that he still gets put on this group of prohibited books. I have a copy of this in the collection. It's the prohibited books by the Catholic Church that Pope Paul IV made an index of, and he's on that list, which means essentially he still remained somewhat of anathema to the Catholic Church, the very thing that he was trying to avoid. It's almost like you have to choose a side. The bigger lesson is, in life, you take pages out of these people's lives and you recognize you do have to stand for something. You can't be in the middle, but you choose, and then you stay by that position. You stand by that. So it's almost like this great, as I said, poetic justice, that his books still end up on the ban list and his name still stays tarnished with the church. It doesn't get redeemed, or they don't make him a saint, or they don't turn him into something else. He still remains this person who in taboo remained in contact with Luther, and therefore any of his works prohibited. Well, that's a good moral of the story, right? It's, wow, that's encouraging. But I love all of these people that played a part in Luther's life, because you see, there were people, it's just like that thing that Jesus describes as what about those that came at the last? What about those that weren't there at the beginning? And I think Ulrich von Hutten's one of those people. He came later, but he stayed by the stuff. And then you've got people who were there at the beginning with Luther, and they decided, can't have that. And wait until we get to Erasmus. I told you, Erasmus, some people have painted his history very, very gloriously. But if you read the right chronicles, you find all kinds of juicy tidbits, even on Erasmus, the man who has nothing in the middle, and take that more ways than you can possibly interpret it. And you'll find that there's a lot of things in Erasmus's life that it was almost like God actually spared Luther by giving Erasmus this mindset of, I must distance myself and stay away. It's almost like God actually blessed Luther with giving him that mindset. But you've got to know all of these people to understand that and make sense of it. So it's like just another one of these people now we've looked at, and we'll look at another one of these in the next future festival. But I hope you're enjoying it, because history, especially this particular period of history, is not boring. It's filled with all kinds of interesting, colorful people, and it really is a reflection really on today's society. There are Staupitzes all over the place, and there's Ulrich von Hutten's all over the place. You find these people in today's society, even in the church, those who are willing to just put their hand to the plow and not look back, and others who are just, you know, I got something to do. Jesus, I'll be right back. Or, gee, we heard Jesus is going to be crucified. We need to get out of here. So don't just think it's just history in an old book. It's living, very much alive, gives us an example of what we might be when our names are, of course, and already are in that book. When somebody might open those pages and read them aloud, because they will be read aloud, what we will be. What I love about God and His Word is I know God does not change, and I know His Word doesn't change. I love history, because history shows me, especially church history, shows me those people who stood by, on, and for God's Word, and God saw them through. Some were martyred, some were not. I see God's purpose in His hand in history just when I study the history of the Bible. And so I told you, this church is a learning place. I think more than probably 80% of our listening audience had some, and I would just say more than just some knowledge of the Reformation. But to take a snapshot of 1 year, and even if I were to I could pick any year, could talk to you right now about the year 1521 and the Diet of Worms, and how that year, not that that year is as important as the year 1520 is. If you don't know why I'm talking about 1520, you might find out one day. But 1521 was an important year. 1520, Luther was already under the threat of excommunication. 1521, January 3rd, 1521, he was excommunicated by Rome, and then came under the same for the ruling powers in Charles, placed under the imperial ban. Could talk about many other years that are important, 1527 and the sack of Rome, or the years in between where the plague wove in and out of all of those places where we're talking about these very people that had family affected and dying from the plague. And simultaneously, which I haven't even gone to the simultaneous activities of what was going on in England. This is all important stuff, not just because of the history. It's all important stuff because when you look back and you say God was going to get his word out to his people. We like to talk about Wycliffe back there 150 years before, calling him the morning star of the Reformation. But then there's this period which seems to be, we'll call it slightly gray. We don't talk too much about the Lollards. We talk about Wycliffe. We don't talk about the Lollards. And the Bible that was produced by Wycliffe and then we'll call it passed on, and the Lollards perpetuating, keeping that going. And the various translations that stream even from the Lollards. We think we have a single mind, Wycliffe, but we refer to the Wycliffite translations because there may have been more than just the one and a half, Wycliffe, Purvey, and forward, than the Lollards. But it's like God was saying, I'm going to get this to my people. They're going to read my word. They're going to hear. They're going to see it. Placing in the heart of a man an idea that was already somehow working in China hundreds of years before Gutenberg did his printing press. Printing was going on in China. Just not that movable type like that, but printing was going on. Gutenberg didn't invent printing. But think about exactly where that printing press and that whole industry was birthed, Mainz. And you begin to see that there's no accident that planting that there in the 1450s rather, and it's got time to pick up the pace and be transported to other major cities, so that by the time Martin Luther's on the scene, you've got enough printing presses to take and mass produce, mass print any message. And by the way, the Catholics were behind the eight ball. They missed out on using the printing press or as a tool, as a propaganda tool, that at least the Protestant Reformation seized. And even God's hand was in that. So when you think about these things, I study these things for a reason, because they let me look back and see how God's hand moved in history. God is not dead. God is not inactive. God is not just doing nothing. As some would say, he's in heaven, but he's not doing anything. And that's equally why I love prophecy. I don't like prophecy when people start to take prophecy and make it sensational and it's mystical. I love prophecy because I love to see God's word unfolded for the things that he prophesied that he would do, that he did, and the few things, which are more than a few, that remain, which he'll be faithful in bringing to come to pass, as he did those things that he foretold that he did already, those things that are yet to happen. It's the same mindset. I love looking at all this, and I can't think of anything else that faithers, believers, should be questing after. More Bible, more Word of God, and if there are auxiliary things, there are the things that inspire to just look back and say, God was in control, and God is still in control. And God is still in control.
Come to this house.